Change works so effortlessly that most people never truly accept it. It contradicts everything we've been taught about transformation, about growth, about becoming who we're meant to be. You see, we've been raised in a world that worships struggle. We're told from our earliest memories that real change comes only to those who grind, who fight their old patterns, who force themselves through discomfort into new behaviors. Growth must be earned through pain. Habits must be conquered through willpower. Transformation must be fought for, tooth and nail. And so we enter every attempt at change prepared for battle. We arm ourselves with discipline, we create elaborate systems, we set harsh deadlines, and we brace for the inevitable war against our own nature. But what if I told you that the very act of struggling against change is what keeps it perpetually out of reach? What if your resistance to ease, your addiction to difficulty, is the invisible force blocking every breakthrough you've ever tried to create? Take a moment and think about this. When was the last time you experienced effortless change in your life? I don't mean the changes you forced through sheer willpower. I mean the transformations that happened naturally, organically, almost without you noticing. Maybe it was falling in love. Maybe it was discovering a passion that consumed you in the most beautiful way. Maybe it was a moment of clarity that shifted your entire perspective in seconds. In those instances, did you struggle? Did you force? Did you create complex systems and rigid timelines? Of course not. You simply aligned. You became coherent with a new frequency, and reality reorganized itself around that alignment. The paradox we're exploring today runs deeper than most people dare to consider. The easier something truly is, the more violently your conditioned mind resists it. Why? Because your ego, your identity, your entire sense of self-worth has been trained to validate transformation through difficulty. If it's too simple, it can't be real change. If it doesn't require suffering, it can't be meaningful growth. If you don't have to earn it through struggle, you don't deserve it. This is the trap that keeps millions of people cycling through the same patterns year after year, believing they're broken, believing they lack discipline, believing they're simply not strong enough to change. But what if none of that is true? What if you're not broken? What if you don't lack discipline? What if the entire framework you've been using to approach change is fundamentally flawed? Let's dive deeper into why your mind creates this resistance to ease. From the moment you were born, you were programmed with survival patterns that equate safety with familiarity and danger with change. This isn't your fault. This is biology. Your nervous system, designed to keep you alive, operates on a simple principle. What's known is safe. What's unknown is potentially lethal. For thousands of years, this served our species well. Stepping outside the cave at night might mean encountering a predator. Eating unfamiliar berries might mean poisoning yourself. Change, in the ancestral environment, was often synonymous with death. But here's where it gets complicated for modern humans. Your ancient brain cannot distinguish between the danger of a saber-toothed tiger and the danger of waking up early to exercise. It cannot differentiate between the threat of exile from your tribe and the threat of changing your diet. To your nervous system, all change registers as potential danger. And what does your body do when it perceives danger? It activates stress responses. It floods your system with cortisol. It narrows your focus to immediate survival. It makes you feel anxious, resistant, and fundamentally unsafe. Think about the last time you tried to change a significant habit. Remember that feeling in your chest, that subtle but persistent anxiety that seemed to grow stronger the more you tried to maintain the new behavior. That wasn't weakness. That wasn't lack of motivation. That was your nervous system sounding every alarm it had, convinced that you were putting yourself in mortal danger. And here's the cruel irony. The more you fight against this resistance, the stronger it becomes. Every time you use willpower to override your body's signals, you're essentially telling your nervous system that change is, indeed, dangerous and requires force to overcome. Your subconscious mind, which controls over 95% of your daily behaviors, receives this message loud and clear. Change equals suffering. Therefore, change must be avoided at all costs. And so it begins to sabotage your efforts in ways so subtle, so sophisticated, that you barely notice what's happening. You forget to pack your gym clothes. You suddenly develop intense cravings for the foods you're trying to avoid. You find yourself making excuses that seem perfectly reasonable in the moment. You experience mysterious drops in energy precisely when you need it most. This isn't self-sabotage in the conscious sense. This is your subconscious mind doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect you from what it perceives as a threat to your survival. The problem compounds when you interpret these natural responses as personal failures. I just don't have enough discipline, you tell yourself. I'm lazy, you conclude. I'm not cut out for this kind of change, you decide. Each of these interpretations creates what psychologists call a failure identity, a deep-seated belief that you are fundamentally incapable of sustained transformation. And once this identity takes root, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that sabotages every future attempt at change before you even begin. But let's move beyond psychology for a moment and examine what's actually happening in your brain when you approach change through force and struggle. Neuroscientists have discovered something fascinating about the way our brains respond to different types of motivation. When you try to change through willpower, through forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do, your brain activates the same neural pathways it uses for processing threats and trauma. Dr. David Rock, a leading researcher in neuroplasticity, found that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for willpower and conscious decision-making, consumes enormous amounts of glucose when it's working against your natural inclinations. This is why willpower feels so exhausting. This is why you can maintain discipline for a few days or weeks before inevitably burning out. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When you're in a state of resistance, when you're fighting against your natural impulses, your brain also suppresses the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is the protein responsible for growing new neural pathways, for creating the actual physical changes in your brain that make new behaviors automatic. In other words, the harder you try to force change, the more you inhibit your brain's ability to actually change. You're literally working against the very mechanism that creates lasting transformation. Meanwhile, when you're in a state of flow, when you're aligned with what you're doing rather than fighting against what you don't want to do, your brain produces increased levels of dopamine, serotonin, and other neurochemicals that enhance learning, memory, and pattern formation. Think about a time when you learned something effortlessly. Maybe it was a skill you were naturally drawn to, or a subject that fascinated you. Do you remember the quality of that learning? How quickly you absorbed information? How easily you retained it? How naturally you improved? That's your brain operating in its optimal state for transformation, not through force, but through alignment. Not through struggle, but through coherence. This brings us to one of the most revolutionary concepts in modern neuroscience. The idea that your brain is constantly rewiring itself, based not just on what you do, but on how you feel while you're doing it. If you meditate through gritted teeth, forcing yourself to sit still while your mind screams in resistance, your brain forms neural pathways that associate meditation with struggle and discomfort. If you exercise while hating every moment, while telling yourself you should be doing this, your brain creates connections that link physical activity with punishment and suffering. But if you can find a way to align with these activities, to approach them from a place of curiosity rather than obligation, from excitement rather than duty, your brain begins to form entirely different neural pathways. Pathways that associate these behaviors with pleasure, with flow, with natural expression of who you are. This is why some people seem to change effortlessly, while others struggle for years with the same issues. It's not that some people have more willpower or better genetics. It's that they've learned, either consciously or unconsciously, how to work with their nervous system instead of against it. Now, let's expand our perspective beyond neuroscience and explore how the principles of quantum physics apply to personal transformation. And once this identity takes root, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that sabotages every future attempt at change before you even begin. But let's move beyond psychology for a moment and examine what's actually happening in your brain when you approach change through force and struggle. Neuroscientists have discovered something fascinating about the way our brains respond to different types of motivation. When you try to change through willpower, through forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do, your brain activates the same neural pathways it uses for processing threats and trauma. Dr. David Rock, a leading researcher in neuroplasticity, found that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for willpower and conscious decision-making, consumes enormous amounts of glucose when it's working against your natural inclinations. This is why willpower feels so exhausting. This is why you can maintain discipline for a few days or weeks before inevitably burning out. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When you're in a state of resistance, when you're fighting against your natural impulses, your brain also suppresses the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is the protein responsible for growing new neural pathways, for creating the actual physical changes in your brain that make new behaviors automatic. In other words, the harder you try to force change, the more you inhibit your brain's ability to actually change. You're literally working against the very mechanism that creates lasting transformation. Meanwhile, when you're in a state of flow, when you're aligned with what you're doing rather than fighting against what you don't want to do, your brain produces increased levels of dopamine, serotonin, and other neurochemicals that enhance learning, memory, and pattern formation. Think about a time when you learned something effortlessly. Maybe it was a skill you were naturally drawn to, or a subject that fascinated you. Do you remember the quality of that learning? How quickly you absorbed information, how easily you retained it, how naturally you improved. That's your brain operating in its optimal state for transformation. Not through force, but through alignment. Not through struggle, but through coherence. This brings us to one of the most revolutionary concepts in modern neuroscience. The idea that your brain is constantly rewiring itself, based not just on what you do, but on how you feel while you're doing it. If you meditate through gritted teeth, forcing yourself to sit still while your mind screams in resistance, your brain forms neural pathways that associate meditation with struggle and discomfort. If you exercise while hating every moment, while telling yourself you should be doing this, your brain creates connections that link physical activity with punishment and suffering. But if you can find a way to align with these activities, to approach them from a place of curiosity rather than obligation, from excitement rather than duty, your brain begins to form entirely different neural pathways. Pathways that associate these behaviors with pleasure, with flow, with natural expression of who you are. This is why some people seem to change effortlessly, while others struggle for years with the same issues. It's not that some people have more willpower or better genetics. It's that they've learned, either consciously or unconsciously, how to work with their nervous system instead of against it. Now let's expand our perspective beyond neuroscience and explore how the principles of quantum physics apply to personal transformation. In quantum mechanics, there's a fundamental principle called coherence. Coherence occurs when multiple elements, particles, waves, or systems align into perfect harmony, functioning not as isolated fragments, but as one unified, powerful entity. When coherence is achieved, energy becomes focused, amplified, and directed. It doesn't scatter randomly or dissipate into noise. Instead, it creates outcomes that are consistent, reliable, and often surprisingly powerful given the minimal input required. Your consciousness operates according to these same principles. When your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and actions are in coherence, when they're all aligned toward the same outcome, you become what I call a quantum signal, strong enough to influence your reality without forcing, pushing, or manipulating anything. But here's where most people get stuck. They think coherence means having positive thoughts all the time, or maintaining perfect emotional control, or never experiencing doubt or resistance. This is a fundamental misunderstanding that actually prevents the very coherence they're trying to create. True coherence isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. It's about all parts of your being moving in the same direction, even if that movement includes temporary challenges or setbacks. Imagine an orchestra tuning their instruments before a performance. Each musician isn't trying to play the most beautiful note possible. They're simply trying to match the same frequency. Some instruments might sound harsh or discordant during this process, but the goal isn't beauty. It's harmony. Your internal transformation works the same way. You don't need every thought to be positive. You don't need every emotion to be elevated. You need every part of your being to be moving toward the same vision of who you're becoming. When this happens, something extraordinary occurs. Your reality begins to reorganize itself around your coherent signal. Opportunities align. Resources appear. People enter your life who support your transformation. Obstacles that seemed insurmountable suddenly dissolve or become irrelevant. This isn't mystical thinking. This is quantum physics applied to consciousness. Just as coherent light becomes a laser capable of cutting through steel, coherent consciousness becomes a transformative force capable of reshaping your entire life experience. But here's the crucial distinction. You can't force coherence any more than you can force a laser beam. Coherence emerges naturally when you remove the interference, when you stop creating internal conflict, when you align your conscious intentions with your subconscious programming. Most people approach change by trying to overpower their resistance. They use willpower like a battering ram, attempting to break down the walls of their conditioning through pure force. But this approach actually creates more interference, more internal conflict, more noise in the signal. The quantum approach to transformation is entirely different. Instead of fighting against resistance, you work to understand it. Instead of overpowering old patterns, you create new ones that feel more natural and attractive than the old ones. Instead of forcing change, you become coherent with the version of yourself who has already changed. Let's examine one of the most pervasive myths in personal development. The belief that meaningful change requires immense effort, sacrifice, and struggle. This myth is so deeply embedded in our culture that questioning it feels almost blasphemous. We celebrate the stories of people who overcame tremendous obstacles through sheer determination. We admire those who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, who never gave up, who fought against all odds. While these stories can be inspiring, they've also created a dangerous misconception that struggle is a prerequisite for transformation, that ease is somehow less valuable than difficulty, that if change doesn't feel hard, it must not be real. This belief system, which I call the effort trap, is one of the primary reasons why so many people remain stuck in patterns they desperately want to change. They're so convinced that transformation must be difficult that they unconsciously reject any approach that feels too easy or natural. But let's examine this belief more closely. Is it actually true that the most profound changes in life require the most effort? Think about some of the most significant transformations you've witnessed or experienced. Falling in love, having children, discovering a passion or purpose that gives your life meaning, moving to a new city that feels like home, meeting someone who becomes a lifelong friend. Did any of these require force or struggle? Or did they happen through a process of recognition, alignment, and natural unfolding? The most powerful changes in life often feel less like achievements and more like remembrances. Less like forcing something new into existence, and more like allowing something that was always there to finally emerge. This is because true transformation doesn't actually change who you are at your core. It reveals who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the patterns you inherited from your family or absorbed from your culture, beneath the protective mechanisms you developed to navigate a world that often felt unsafe or unwelcoming. When you approach change from this perspective, as a process of revealing rather than achieving, everything shifts. Instead of trying to force yourself to become someone different, you begin to remove the obstacles that prevent your authentic self from expressing naturally. This is why some changes feel effortless, while others feel impossible. The effortless changes are those that align with your true nature. The impossible changes are those that ask you to become someone you were never meant to be. But here's the challenge. In a culture that prizes effort above all else, learning to trust ease requires tremendous courage. It means questioning some of the most fundamental beliefs you've held about worth, value, and achievement. It means being willing to consider that maybe you don't have to earn your transformation through suffering. Maybe you don't have to prove your dedication through struggle. Maybe the very fact that you desire to change is evidence that the change is already seeking to happen through you. When you begin to see change not as something you must force into existence, but as something that wants to emerge through you, your entire relationship with transformation shifts. You stop being the warrior fighting against your own nature and become the gardener creating conditions for natural growth. And just as a gardener doesn't force a seed to grow, but simply provides the right environment for growth to occur, you begin to focus less on forcing specific behaviors and more on creating the internal and external conditions that make positive change inevitable. Now let's dive deeper into what coherence actually looks like in practical terms, and why most people remain trapped in what I call energetic fragmentation. Imagine your consciousness as a radio transmitter. When you're coherent, you're broadcasting a clear, strong signal on a specific frequency. The message is unmistakable, and anyone tuned to that frequency receives it loud and clear. But when you're fragmented, you're broadcasting multiple conflicting signals simultaneously. You're sending mixed messages that create static, confusion, and interference. The result is that no clear message gets through, and nothing meaningful manifests in your reality. Most people exist in a state of chronic fragmentation without even realizing it. They say they want to be healthy while secretly believing they don't have time for self-care. They claim they want financial abundance while harboring deep shame about money. They express desire for loving relationships while maintaining walls that keep others at a distance. This isn't hypocrisy. This is the natural result of living in a culture that rarely teaches us how to examine and integrate our conflicting beliefs, emotions, and desires. Let me give you a specific example. Sarah came to me frustrated because she couldn't maintain a consistent exercise routine despite trying for over 5 years. She had gym memberships, workout plans, personal trainers, accountability partners, all the external tools anyone could need. But when we examined her internal landscape, we discovered a web of conflicting beliefs. Consciously, she wanted to be fit and healthy. But subconsciously, she associated exercise with punishment, discipline with deprivation, and physical effort with the emotional abuse she'd experienced from a coach in high school. Part of her genuinely wanted to change, but another part of her was terrified that becoming physically strong would make her threatening to others, potentially leading to rejection or abandonment. Yet another part believed that focusing on her body was vain and selfish, that she should be spending her time on more important pursuits. With all these conflicting signals running simultaneously, is it any wonder that her attempts at change felt like an internal war? Her conscious mind would set a goal, but her subconscious mind would sabotage it to protect her from what it perceived as multiple threats. This is what fragmentation looks like. It's not that Sarah lacked willpower or motivation. It's that she was trying to create change while broadcasting contradictory frequencies simultaneously. Coherence, by contrast, occurs when all parts of your being are aligned toward the same outcome. This doesn't mean you never experience doubt or resistance. It means that when these feelings arise, you acknowledge them, understand their purpose, and integrate them into a unified direction forward. For Sarah, coherence began when she stopped trying to force herself to exercise and started exploring what physical movement meant to her. She discovered that she loved dancing, hiking, and swimming, activities that felt like play rather than punishment. But more importantly, she began to address the underlying beliefs that had created the fragmentation in the first place. She worked to heal the trauma around physical effort. She examined her fears about becoming too much for others. She redefined strength as self-care rather than selfishness. As these internal conflicts, this is how sustainable change actually works. Not through overpowering resistance, but through understanding and integrating it. Not through forcing new behaviors, but through creating internal alignment that makes those behaviors feel natural and inevitable. Now that you understand the principles behind effortless change, let's explore a practical framework for creating coherence in your own life. I call this the alignment protocol, and it consists of 3 fundamental shifts that will transform your relationship with change forever. The first shift is choosing clarity over control. This might sound simple, but it represents a radical departure from how most people approach transformation. Most people are addicted to controlling the process of change. They create detailed plans, elaborate systems, rigid timelines, and complex accountability mechanisms. They micromanage every aspect of their transformation, constantly adjusting, tweaking, and optimizing their approach. But here's what they don't realize. This obsession with control actually creates the very resistance they're trying to overcome. When you try to control every variable in the change process, you're essentially telling your nervous system that change is so dangerous and unpredictable that it requires constant vigilance and intervention. Clarity, by contrast, involves getting crystal clear on what you want to become and why you want to become it, then trusting the process to unfold naturally. It means making a definitive choice about who you're becoming, and then allowing that choice to guide your actions without constantly second-guessing or redeciding. When you choose clarity over control, you emit what quantum physicists call a coherent signal into the field of possibilities. This signal doesn't require your constant management or intervention. It simply needs to remain clear and undisturbed. Think of it like planting a seed. Once you've placed the seed in fertile soil and provided the basic conditions for growth, water, sunlight, nutrients, you don't dig it up every day to check on its progress. You don't try to control the exact timing of its growth or the precise shape of its leaves. You simply trust that the intelligence within the seed will unfold naturally when given the right conditions. Your transformation works the same way. Once you've made a clear choice about who you're becoming, your job is not to control the how or the when, but to create and maintain the conditions that support that choice. The second shift is dropping the timeline. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the alignment protocol because it goes against every goal-setting methodology you've ever learned. Most people approach change with urgent energy. I need to lose 20 pounds by summer. I have to find a new job within 6 months. I must be in a relationship by the time I'm 35. This urgency feels like motivation, but it's actually the energy of lack disguised as strategy. When you set desperate timelines for change, you're broadcasting a signal of scarcity into the quantum field. You're essentially saying, I don't have this thing I want, and if I don't get it quickly, something terrible will happen. This energy of desperation creates resistance, pressure, and anxiety, all of which interfere with your ability to align with what you desire. True transformation operates on what I call quantum timing, which has nothing to do with linear time and everything to do with readiness, alignment, and coherence. When you're truly ready for a change, when every part of your being is aligned with that change, it can happen instantaneously. But when you're forcing change before you're ready, it can take years or never happen at all. Dropping the timeline doesn't mean becoming passive or losing your sense of direction. It means trusting that when you maintain clear alignment with who you're becoming, the timing will take care of itself. It means focusing on the quality of your transformation rather than the speed of it. The third shift is trusting your first alignment. This is perhaps the most subtle but powerful aspect of the entire protocol. Most people, when they first feel inspired to change, experience a moment of pure clarity and excitement. In that moment, they know exactly what they want to become, and they feel completely confident in their ability to become it. This is what I call the first alignment, the initial moment when your consciousness locks onto a new possibility. But what happens next? Almost immediately, the mind steps in with doubts, questions, and in an effort to be responsible or realistic, most people begin to dilute their first alignment with analysis, planning, and preparation. They repeat their intention over and over, not because they're aligned with it, but because they're afraid it wasn't enough the first time. But here's the quantum truth. Your first alignment, when it comes from a place of genuine inspiration and clarity, is often the most powerful signal you'll ever send into the field of possibilities. Every time you repeat it from a place of doubt rather than faith, you're actually weakening the signal rather than strengthening it. It's like sending a clear radio transmission and then immediately following up with static and interference. The original message gets lost in the noise. Let me share some real-world examples of how the alignment protocol works in practice, because I know that understanding the theory is only half the battle. The real transformation happens when you see how these principles apply to actual human experiences. Consider the story of Michael, a marketing executive from London who had been trying to quit smoking for over 8 years. He had tried everything: nicotine patches, hypnotherapy, support groups, prescription medications, even alternative treatments like acupuncture and herbal remedies. Nothing worked for more than a few weeks. Michael's approach to quitting smoking was a perfect example of the effort trap. He treated smoking like an enemy to be defeated through willpower and external intervention. He focused intensely on what he didn't want to do, smoke, rather than on who he wanted to become. When Michael discovered the alignment protocol, everything changed. Instead of trying to quit smoking, he began to align with his identity as someone who naturally chose clean air and optimal health. He stopped setting quit dates and started embodying the energy of someone who had never been a smoker to begin with. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was effortless. Over the course of 3 months, Michael found himself naturally reaching for cigarettes less and less frequently. He didn't force himself to resist cravings. Instead, he noticed that the cravings themselves became weaker and less frequent as his identity shifted. What's remarkable is that Michael couldn't pinpoint an exact moment when he quit. The change happened so naturally that one day he simply realized he hadn't thought about cigarettes in weeks. He had become someone who didn't smoke, and smoking had become inconsistent with who he was. This is how coherent change works. It doesn't feel like effort or struggle. It feels like natural expression of who you're becoming. Another powerful example is Lisa, a single mother from Denver who had been struggling with chronic anxiety and depression for most of her adult life. She had been through therapy, tried multiple medications, and read countless self-help books. But her mental state continued to feel like a constant battle. Lisa's breakthrough came when she stopped trying to fix her anxiety and started aligning with her natural state of calm and confidence. Instead of focusing on managing her symptoms, she began to embody the version of herself who felt naturally peaceful and centered. This shift required Lisa to examine some deep-seated beliefs about her worthiness of peace and happiness. She discovered that part of her believed she didn't deserve to feel good, that anxiety was somehow keeping her safe from disappointment or rejection. As Lisa worked through these beliefs and aligned with her true nature, her anxiety began to dissolve naturally. She didn't have to fight against anxious thoughts. They simply occurred less frequently as her internal landscape shifted toward coherence. Perhaps most importantly, Lisa's transformation affected every area of her life. As she became more aligned with her natural state of peace, her relationships improved, her career began to flourish, and her role as a mother became more fulfilling and effortless. These examples illustrate a crucial point about coherent change. It tends to create positive ripple effects throughout your entire life. When you align with who you truly are in one area, that alignment naturally extends to other areas without additional effort. This is because coherence is not compartmentalized. You can't be coherent in your health, but fragmented in your relationships, or aligned in your career, but scattered in your personal growth. True coherence is holistic. It affects every aspect of your being simultaneously. Now, let me address a common concern that arises when people hear these stories. But what about the practical steps? What about the daily actions and behaviors that create change? This is an important question because it reveals a fundamental. When you're truly aligned with who you're becoming, the appropriate actions arise naturally. You don't have to force yourself to behave differently. Different behaviors become the natural expression of your transformed identity. Michael didn't have to force himself not to smoke. As his identity shifted, not smoking became natural. Lisa didn't have to force herself to think positive thoughts. As her internal state shifted toward coherence, peaceful thoughts became her default. This doesn't mean that action isn't important. It means that aligned action is effortless action. It means that when you're coherent with who you're becoming, the right actions feel obvious, natural, and energizing, rather than forced, difficult, and draining. Now, let's address some of the most common forms of resistance that people encounter when they begin to apply the alignment protocol. Understanding these patterns will help you recognize them in your own experience and move through them with greater ease. The first form of resistance is what I call complexity addiction. This occurs when your mind insists that transformation must be complicated to be effective. You might find yourself thinking, "This seems too simple. Surely change requires more effort than this. If it were this easy, everyone would be doing it." Complexity addiction is actually a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. Your ego, which has built its identity around struggle and effort, feels threatened by the possibility that change could be simple and natural. So it creates elaborate reasons why the simple approach won't work for you specifically. You might find yourself researching endlessly, looking for the perfect method or the complete system. You might become convinced that you need to understand every aspect of neuroscience, quantum physics, and psychology before you can begin to change. You might create detailed plans and complex tracking systems that give you the illusion of progress, while actually preventing you from taking aligned action. The antidote to complexity addiction is to remember that the most powerful forces in nature are elegantly simple. Gravity doesn't require a complex explanation to function. Love doesn't need a detailed manual to transform lives. And change doesn't require sophisticated understanding to occur naturally. The second common form of resistance is worthiness questioning. This shows up as persistent doubts about whether you deserve the change you desire. You might hear internal voices saying things like, "Who am I to think I can change this easily?" Or, "Other people might be able to transform effortlessly. But I'm different. I'm more damaged, more stuck, more fundamentally flawed." Worthiness questioning is rooted in early programming that taught you to earn love, acceptance, and positive experiences through struggle and sacrifice. This programming runs so deep that ease can actually feel dangerous or wrong, as if accepting that change could be simple would somehow make you lazy, entitled, or spiritually inferior. The key to moving through worthiness questioning is to recognize that your value as a human being has never been dependent on how hard you work for your transformation. You were born worthy of ease, joy, and effortless growth. This worthiness isn't something you earn, it's something you are. The third form of resistance is timeline anxiety. This manifests as persistent worry about whether change is happening fast enough. You might find yourself constantly checking for progress, comparing your rate of transformation to others, or feeling frustrated that results aren't appearing according to your preferred schedule. Timeline anxiety reveals an underlying belief that you're behind, running out of time, or somehow failing if change doesn't happen immediately. This energy of urgency actually interferes with the natural timing of transformation, creating pressure and stress that block the very coherence you're trying to create. Remember that authentic transformation often happens in waves rather than straight lines. You might experience periods of rapid change followed by periods of integration where progress feels slower or even stagnant. Both phases are essential parts of the process. The fourth form of resistance is proof demanding. This shows up as a constant need for external validation that your new approach is working. You might find yourself obsessively monitoring metrics, seeking reassurance from others, or requiring immediate tangible results before you're willing to trust the process. Proof demanding reveals a lack of faith in your own internal guidance and wisdom. The path through proof demanding involves learning to trust the subtle signals of alignment. Increased energy, improved mood, greater clarity, enhanced creativity, deeper peace. These internal indicators are often the first signs of coherent change, appearing long before external results become visible. The fifth and perhaps most challenging form of resistance is identity protection. This occurs when part of your psyche recognizes that true change would require letting go of aspects of your current identity that feel familiar and safe, even if they're ultimately limiting. You might discover that you've unconsciously organized your life around being the person who struggles with certain issues. Your relationships, your career, your social connections, even your sense of purpose might be built around your current limitations. The prospect of change, then, feels threatening not just to your problems, but to your entire sense of self. Identity protection often manifests as subtle self-sabotage just as breakthrough feels imminent. You might find excuses to abandon practices that are working, create drama that justifies returning to old patterns, or suddenly develop new emergencies that require all your attention. The key to moving through identity protection is to recognize that who you truly are is not your limitations, your struggles, or your problems. Your authentic identity is the consciousness that observes these patterns, not the patterns themselves. As you align with this deeper truth, you can release outdated aspects of your identity with gratitude rather than resistance. Now that we've explored the theory, practice, and common challenges of effortless change, let's focus on how to integrate these principles into your daily life in a sustainable way. Because understanding the concepts intellectually is only the beginning. True transformation happens through consistent embodiment. The key to sustainable integration is what I call gentle consistency. This means showing up to your transformation with regularity, but without force, with commitment, but without rigidity, with intention, but without attachment to specific outcomes. Most people approach change with what I call weekend warrior energy. They go from 0 to 60 immediately, implementing dramatic changes across multiple areas of their life simultaneously. This approach almost always leads to burnout and eventual abandonment of the new practices. Gentle consistency takes a different approach. Instead of making massive changes quickly, you make small adjustments that feel natural and sustainable. Instead of trying to transform everything at once, you focus on one area of alignment at a time. Instead of forcing yourself through discomfort, you honor your natural rhythms and energy levels. For example, if you want to establish a meditation practice, gentle consistency might mean starting with just 2 minutes of stillness each morning, rather than committing to hour-long sessions. If you want to improve your fitness, it might mean taking a short walk after lunch, rather than signing up for an intensive gym program. The magic of gentle consistency is that small, aligned actions create momentum that naturally expands over time. As you build trust with yourself through keeping simple commitments, you develop the confidence and energy to take on bigger challenges. But perhaps even more importantly, gentle consistency allows you to maintain coherence throughout the change process. When you're not forcing yourself beyond your natural capacity, you remain aligned with the energy of ease and flow that makes transformation effortless. Another crucial aspect of sustainable integration is what I call environmental design. This involves organizing your external world to support the internal changes you're making, without relying on willpower to overcome environmental obstacles. If you want to eat healthier, environmental design might mean removing processed foods from your home and filling your kitchen with nourishing options. If you want to read more, it It might mean placing books in visible locations and putting your phone in another room. If you want to exercise regularly, it might mean laying out your workout clothes the night before. Environmental design works because it reduces the number of decisions you have to make each day. Instead of constantly choosing between aligned and misaligned options, you create conditions where the aligned choice becomes the path of least resistance. But environmental design goes beyond physical arrangements. It also includes the social and emotional environments you create. This might mean spending more time with people who support your growth and less time with those who reinforce old patterns. It might mean consuming media that inspires. If you choose the second path, know that it won't be easy. There will be days when you question whether it's worth it. Moments when the old version will seem more attractive. People who will try to convince you that you're exaggerating, dreaming too much, trying unnecessarily hard. But also know that on the other side of this journey is a version of you that you can barely imagine now. A version that wakes up with purpose, that faces challenges with calm and wisdom, that loves and is loved deeply, that genuinely contributes to the world around them, that lives aligned with their deepest values. This version isn't an impossible fantasy. It's a real potentiality, coded in your DNA, waiting to be activated by the choices you make every moment. The question that remains is simple, but profound. Who do you choose to be from now on? Will you continue being a prisoner of your old patterns? Or will you become the conscious architect of your own evolution? Will you wait for life to change so you can feel different? Or will you feel different so that life changes? Will you live reacting to what happens? Or will you start consciously creating what you want to happen? 15-second pause. If you've decided you want to take this journey, I suggest you start right now. Not tomorrow, not next Monday, not when conditions are perfect. Now, take 3 deep breaths. Close your eyes if you can. And for 1 minute, connect with your best version. See her, feel her, embody her. And then, open your eyes and take one small step toward becoming that person. Remember, you don't need to change everything at once. You just need to start. And then continue. One day, one choice, one conscious moment at a time. Your transformation isn't just your gift to yourself. It's your gift to all the lives you touch. It's your contribution to a more conscious, more compassionate, more evolved world. The future you desire is on the other side of the person you're willing to become. And that person has been waiting for you for a long time. This has been Mind Gold. Thank you for joining me on this deep journey through the science of human transformation. Remember, you are not a victim of your circumstances. You are the creator of your experience, and the power to create the life you desire has always been in your hands. Until the next transformation.